Novel, The Echo Year. Episode 1. The Day the Echo Changed. Calvin Maxwell's life was measured in quiet, predictable increments. The chime of the school bell at 3:15 p.m., the smell of chalk dust and old paper in his history classroom, the nightly ritual of tea as he graded essays on the causes of the Civil War. And once a year, the whisper. It always came on October 9th. At precisely 4:23 p.m., the time of his own birth, a voice that was both intimately familiar and utterly alien would speak a single, nonsensical phrase into the silence of his mind. It was not a sound heard by the ears, but a thought etched directly onto the canvas of his consciousness. For 42 years, it had been a bizarre, private constant. He kept a small, leather-bound journal titled Echoes. The entries were a cryptic chronicle of his life. 1979. The rabbit's foot is blue. 1988. She wore red gloves. 1999. The key is under the rock. 2015. Radio says snow. Phrases plucked from forgotten conversations, from the background noise of a childhood he barely remembered. He'd long ago stopped trying to decipher them. They were just his echo, a mental tick, a ghost in the machinery of his brain. A quirk, like his father's habit of humming show tunes. Harmless. October 9th of this year was a Tuesday. Calvin dismissed his last class, the air crackling with the restless energy of impending fall. He drove home to his modest, silent house on Maple Street in the small town of Beckett, Maine. He made his tea. He sat in his worn armchair, the one with the perfect view of the oak tree in his backyard, its leaves just beginning to turn. He waited. At 4:22 p.m., a strange tension filled the room. The light from the window seemed to thicken. The second hand on his wall clock ticked with unnerving volume. He felt it then, the familiar pressure building behind his eyes, a static hum in the base of his skull. 4:23 p.m. The whisper came. But it wasn't a detached fragment of memory. It was clear, sharp, and laced with a panic so visceral it felt like a shard of ice in his spine. "Don't turn around, Cal. He's standing right behind you." Calvin froze. His breath hitched in his throat. The teacup trembled in his hand, clattering against the saucer. This was different. This was a command. A warning. For a full minute, he didn't move. He stared straight ahead at the orange and gold of the oak tree, his knuckles white. The room was utterly silent except for the frantic drumming of his own heart. "It's just the echo," he told himself. "It's never been real. It's just a memory." But the voice had never spoken to him before. It had only ever described. Gathering every ounce of courage, Calvin Maxwell, a man who had spent his life looking into the past, slowly turned to look at the present. The room behind his chair was empty. The doorway to the hall was clear. A wave of relief, warm and weak, washed over him. He let out a shaky laugh, a sound that died in his throat as his eyes flicked to the large, dark window pane that reflected the room. In the reflection, for a fraction of a second before it synced with his movement, he saw the silhouette of a man standing directly behind his empty chair. Tall, indistinct, a shape of solid shadow. Then it was gone, and the reflection showed only his own pale, frightened face. He spent the night with every light in the house blazing. He didn't sleep. He pored over the Echo's journal, searching for a pattern he'd been too complacent to see. The phrases seemed innocent, but now he wondered. The key is under the rock. Whose key? What rock? She wore red gloves. Who was she? The next morning, hollow-eyed and jumpy, he went to school. The world felt subtly off-kilter, like a painting hanging a millimeter crooked. He taught his classes on autopilot, his mind replaying the whisper and that frozen image in the window. During his free period, he went to the school library, a dusty, sunlit room that smelled of aging paper. On a whim, he pulled the 1987 yearbook from the shelf, the year he was 10. He flipped to the class photos, to his own awkward, gap-toothed smile. and his eyes drifted to the next row, to a boy with floppy brown hair and a mischievous grin. Danny Shea. His best friend. The friend who had died. A sudden, piercing headache lanced through Calvin's temple, and beneath the pain, faint but unmistakable, the static hum returned. It wasn't October 9th, but the echo was there. It whispered a new phrase, short and simple. The treehouse rope. And with the words came a flash. Not a memory, but a sensation. The rough, fibrous bite of hemp rope on his palms. The dizzying smell of pine sap and fear. He slammed the yearbook shut. The sound echoing in the quiet library. The echo had never come twice in a year. Never. It was changing. It was awakening. And it was leading him somewhere. He knew, with a dread that was cold and certain, that he had to find that rope. Episode 2. The Rope and the Rock. The memory of the treehouse was a fragmented, sun-dappled thing. It belonged to a patch of woods behind the old Shea property, on the outskirts of Beckett. The Sheas had moved away years after Danny's death, and the land had been bought by a lumber company that never got around to cutting. The woods had been left to reclaim itself. Calvin drove there after school, his old station wagon bouncing on the overgrown fire road. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. Each step into the woods felt like a step back in time. The landmarks were buried but not gone. The moss-covered boulder they'd called the whale. The crooked birch that marked the fork. And there it was. The great old oak, now gnarled and partially skeletal, one massive limb stretching out like a broken arm. Nailed to its trunk, weathered to silver gray, were the remains of the platform. The rope ladder was long gone, but a single, thick length of hemp rope still hung from the limb, its end frayed and rotting, swaying gently in the breeze. The treehouse rope. Calvin reached out, his fingers brushing the coarse fibers. The contact was like completing a circuit. A jolt of memory, vivid and brutal, flooded him. Not memory. Memory with feeling. He is 10. Danny is below him, shouting, his face a pale moon in the gloom under the trees. Hurry up, Cal. It's gonna break. The rope is slick in Calvin's sweaty hands. He's climbing too fast, the old wood of the ladder groaning. He can hear the nail pulling free from the plank above with a shriek of protest. He feels the lurch, the stomach-dropping sensation of falling. Not far. Just a few feet. He lands hard on his back, the wind knocked out of him. Danny is laughing, then his laugh cuts off. Cal, your arm. Calvin gasped, stumbling back from the rope, clutching his right forearm. The phantom pain was sharp and real. He'd broken his arm in that fall. A clean break. He'd worn a cast for 6 weeks. A normal childhood accident. But the echo hadn't shown him the fall. It had shown him the moment before. The fear. Danny's warning. And the perspective. He was looking down at Danny. He was already on the treehouse platform. The memory of the fall was from above. So what was the rope now? A trigger. A key. He looked around, his heart pounding. The whisper had brought him here. What was it trying to show him? His eyes scanned the forest floor, the roots, the ferns. And then he saw it, almost hidden under a carpet of moss at the base of the oak. A flat, gray stone. Not a natural part of the landscape. A rock that had been placed there. The key is under the rock. The phrase from the 1999 echo burned in his mind. He hadn't thought of that rock in over 20 years. He knelt, his knees cracking, and pushed the heavy stone aside. The earth beneath was soft, worm-ridden. He dug his fingers in, and they closed around something cold and metallic. He pulled it out. It was a key. Old, tarnished silver, with an ornate, filigree head. It was not a house key. It was too fancy. It looked like a key to a jewelry box, or a diary. As he held it, the static hum rose in his head again. A wave of dissonance. This time it didn't form words. It formed an image, projected behind his eyes with painful clarity. A house. Not just any house. The old Victorian on Elm Street, the one everyone in town called the gingerbread house for its ridiculous, peeling scrollwork. It had been empty since before he was born. A haunted house for generations of Beckett kids. The image shifted, focusing on the porch. On the loose floorboard third from the left, warped and painted a faded blue. The connection snapped. Calvin slumped against the tree, the key biting into his palm. The echo was no longer a passive recording. It was a guided tour. It was using the fragments of his past, the forgotten clutter of his life, to create a trail of breadcrumbs. And it had just given him the next one. He didn't go home. He drove straight into town, the key a heavy secret in his pocket. Elm Street was quiet in the twilight. The gingerbread house loomed at the end of the block, a silhouette of turrets and sagging gables against the purple sky. It looked less like a house and more like a skull. Calvin parked a block away, feeling like a criminal. He walked up the overgrown path, the dried grass whispering against his legs. The porch groaned under his weight. He counted the floorboards. 1, 2, 3 from the left. It was blue, just as the vision had shown. He knelt, pried at the warped wood with his fingers. It came up with a shriek of rusty nails. Inside the cavity lay not treasure, but another piece of his past. A small plastic toy soldier, green and chipped. His toy. He remembered it now. He'd carried it everywhere when he was 7. He'd lost it. He'd cried for days. He picked it up. The moment his skin touched the cold plastic, the echo surged, not with an image, but with a torrent of sound. Children laughing, the frantic jingle of an ice cream truck tune, and one clear, desperate voice. A boy's voice, his own voice screaming, "Danny, run." Then, silence. And a new, awful understanding dawned on Calvin. This wasn't random. The treehouse, the key, the toy soldier. These weren't just memories. They were waypoints. They were all connected to one summer. The summer he was 10. The summer Danny died. And the echo, his silent annual companion for 42 years, was systematically forcing him to relive it. Not to remember the happy times. To remember the thing his mind had worked a lifetime to bury. The final piece of the vision from the library returned, the sensation he hadn't been able to place before. The smell of pine sap and fear. And beneath it, something else. The coppery, unmistakable scent of blood. He looked up from the hole in the porch. Across the street, under the dim glow of a street lamp, a figure stood watching the house. It was tall, man-shaped, but the light didn't seem to touch it right, leaving its features in deep shadow. It was perfectly still. It was the silhouette from his window. Calvin's blood turned to ice. The echo wasn't just in his head anymore. It was out here, and it was following him. He shoved the toy soldier in his pocket, replaced the board and fled the porch, not daring to look back. When he reached his car and finally glanced in the rearview mirror, the street was empty. But the next whisper came before he'd even started the engine. A dry, rustling sound in his mind like dead leaves. He remembers the well. Episode 3. The Well and the Whispers. The well. Of course. It wasn't on any map of Beckett, not anymore. It was a secret place, a forbidden place. It lay in a hollow behind the Shea property, deeper in the woods than the treehouse, a dark, wet mouth in the earth that had been dry for a century. The grown-ups had forbidden them to go near it, which to 10-year-old Cal and Danny was an irresistible invitation. Calvin drove home in a cold sweat, the toy soldier burning a hole in his pocket. The figure under the street lamp was gone, but its presence lingered, a pressure against the back of his neck. He could feel it. The echo wasn't just a voice or a memory anymore. It had shape, intent. It was hurting him. For the first time, he considered stopping, throwing the key and the toy soldier into the river, burning the echo's journal, and pretending the last 2 days were a nervous breakdown. But a deeper, more terrifying instinct told him it was too late. The door had been opened. If he stopped walking the path, the thing on the path would come to find him. He spent a sleepless night researching, not in books, but in the ghostly archive of his own mind. He took out the Echo's journal and began to annotate it, not with facts, but with feelings, with fragmented images that surfaced with each phrase. The rabbit's foot is blue. 1979. A vague sense of a county fair. His father's large hand. Disappointment. She wore red gloves. 1988. A woman crying. A hospital corridor smell. His mother? No, a nurse. Radio says snow. 2015. Not his memory. His father's. Sitting in the parked car, the dashboard glowing, listening to the storm warning. The night his mother left? The connections were tenuous, maddening. It was like trying to reconstruct a shattered vase from the dust of its pieces. The next whisper came not at a specific time, but in the gray limbo just before dawn, as he drifted into an exhausted half-sleep. It wasn't a single voice this time. It was a chorus, a cacophony of whispers overlapping, all in his own voice at different ages. A child's treble, a teenager's crack, his own adult baritone. They hissed and sighed, a torrent of forgotten audio. Dash, lost the game. Promise not to tell. It's moving, look, it's moving. Deeper, we have to go deeper. The water isn't water. And beneath them all, clear as a bell struck in the silence, his own 10-year-old voice, trembling with a terror so pure it froze his blood even now. It's not a well. It's a throat. Calvin jolted upright, gasping for air. The room was freezing. His breath plumed in the pale light filtering through the blinds. He looked at the digital clock, 5:17 a.m. October was asserting itself. He knew what he had to do. He had to go to the well. In daylight. He needed to see the place before the memory swallowed him whole. He drove to the woods as the sun burned off the morning mist. The path to the well was gone, utterly consumed by decades of undergrowth. He used a walking stick to part the thickets of thorn and clawing brambles, the woods fighting him every step of the way. It felt personal. Finally, he stumbled into the hollow. And there it was. It was smaller than he remembered. A ring of crumbling, moss-furred stones about 3 feet high, surrounding a pit of absolute blackness. Dead leaves had drifted into it, forming a soggy, decaying mat. A smell rose from it, not the smell of dank water, but of cold stone, wet earth, and something else, something faintly organic and sweetly rotten, like old mushrooms. He approached slowly, each step an act of will. The chorus of whispers started again in his head, a low static buzz. He peered over the edge. Darkness. He pulled a flashlight from his jacket and shone it down. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the mossy sides for about 15 feet before the darkness swallowed it. There was no reflection of water. It seemed to go down forever. And then he saw it. Not at the bottom. On the wall, about 8 feet down. A flash of color. Something unnatural. Something that did not belong to stone and moss. It was a patch of red. Bright synthetic red. His breath caught. She wore red gloves. Without thinking, driven by a compulsion stronger than fear, Calvin looked for a way down. An old, rusted iron rung was bolted into the stone just below the rim. Then another, vanishing into the darkness. A ladder. Forgotten. Forbidden. He shouldn't. Every sane cell in his body screamed at him to run. But the echo had him. It had him by the childhood he couldn't remember. He slung the flashlight's lanyard around his wrist, gripped the cold, flaking iron, and began to descend into the earth. The temperature dropped with every rung. The whispers grew louder, resolving into a single looping phrase from his own young voice. Deeper, we have to go deeper. The stones were slimy, the rungs treacherous. 8 feet down he reached the spot. It wasn't a glove. It was a mitten. A child's red woolen mitten, snagged on a protruding stone. It was filthy, moth-eaten, frozen in time. He knew it. With a certainty that felt like a physical blow, he knew it. It belonged to Maggie Trent. Maggie, a girl from their class. A quiet girl with pigtails. She had gone missing that same summer. For 2 terrible days, the whole town had searched. They'd found her wandering in the woods 3 miles away, disoriented, babbling about the man in the well. She was never the same. Her family moved away that fall. It was the town's other tragedy, overshadowed by Danny's more concrete, more acceptable death in a bicycle accident on Route 117.
Un bicycle accident.
That was the story. The official story. Calvin's fingers brushed the frozen wool of the mitten. The memory didn't come as a flash. It detonated. He is in the well. Not at the bottom, but clinging to the ladder. Danny is above him, his face a pale circle against the bright sky. Maggie is below him, her red mitten a spot of color in the gloom. She's crying. I want to go up. And he, Cal, is looking not at her, but at the wall opposite him, at a crack in the stone. And from that crack, something is watching back. Not an animal. Something with a slow, patient intelligence. Something that lives in the dark between the stones. He feels its gaze like a physical weight, a cold sludge poured into his soul. It wants them to come deeper. It's hungry for their warmth, their light, their fear. He screams a raw, ragged sound that echoes in the stone throat. Danny, run. Chaos. Maggie screams. Danny is pulling him up. He's scrambling, falling, the rough stone tearing his clothes. They burst out into the blinding sun, weeping, gasping, forever changed. Calvin cried out, losing his grip on the ladder. He slid down several rungs, the iron tearing at his palms, before he caught himself, dangling over the black pit. The flashlight beam swung wildly, illuminating the depths below for one horrifying instant. He saw bones. Small, white and clean. Not an animal's. A rabbit's? A cat's? Or something with fingers. And at the very edge of the light, where the wall met the impossible deep, the stones didn't look like stones anymore. They looked like they had been arranged. They looked like a face, rough-hewn and ancient. Its mouth open in a silent scream that was also an invitation to fall. The whispers in his head coalesced into a single, deafening roar that was not his voice at all. It was dry, ancient, and insatiable. It was the voice of the well. You promised you'd come back. Panic gave him strength. He hauled himself up, rung by agonizing rung, expecting a cold, stony hand to close around his ankle at any moment. He scrambled over the lip of the well, and lay on the dead leaves, chest heaving, staring at the unforgiving gray sky. He knew the truth now. Danny hadn't died on Route 117. The bicycle accident was a lie, a clean story for a messy, unspeakable horror. Danny had died because of what was in the well, because of what they had awakened, because of the promise a terrified little boy had made to a darkness that never forgets. The echo wasn't his memory. It was the well's memory. It was using the echoes of his past to lure him back, to finish what was started. And as he lay there, he realized the chorus of whispers in his head hadn't stopped. It had simply changed key. It was no longer just his voice. Woven into it, faint but growing stronger, was Danny's. Episode 4. The Unquiet Friend. The world had become a thin veneer. Calvin moved through his days at Beckett High like a ghost, teaching the Battle of Gettysburg while the real war raged in the caverns of his mind. The whispers were a constant now, a tinnitus of the soul. Mostly it was his own fragmented past, but increasingly, he heard the higher, lighter cadence of Danny Shea's voice. You dropped your soldier, Cal. My dad says that well is older than the town. Don't be a baby. It's just dark. They weren't threatening. They were worse. They were nostalgic. They were the sound of a lost friendship. And they tugged at him with a sorrow more profound than any horror. He began to see things. Not the figure, the silhouette, as he now thought of it, but glimpses. A floppy-haired boy ducking around a corner in the school hallway. The reflection of a child sitting in the passenger seat of his car. They were momentary, gone when he blinked, but they left an afterimage of profound loneliness. He needed answers that couldn't be found in his own crumbling mind. He needed to know what the town knew and had buried. He went to the Beckett Chronicle archives, a dusty room in the town library's basement. He looked up the summer of his 10th year. The microfilm word, spooling through blurry images of garden shows and town council meetings. Then he found it. July 18, 1987. Local girl, 9, found after 2 days' search. The article was brief, sanitized. Maggie Trent missing from her home, found disoriented near Miller's Creek. No mention of the well. No mention of the man in the well. A quote from the sheriff. She likely got turned around in the woods. Kids shouldn't play out there alone. Then 2 weeks later, a smaller, grimmer piece. August 2, 1987. Tragic accident claims local boy. Daniel Danny Shea, 10, died after a collision with a logging truck on Route 117. The driver was not at fault. Speed and a blind curve were cited. A terrible tragedy, said the principal of Beckett Elementary. A black and white photo of Danny, the same one from the yearbook, smiled innocently from the page. Calvin's eyes scanned the text, looking for what wasn't there. And he found it. In the list of survivors, he is survived by his parents, Richard and Eleanor Shea, and his younger sister, Abigail. Abigail. Abby. Danny's little sister. She'd been just a toddler back then. Calvin remembered a tiny, curly-haired shadow trailing after them sometimes. The Shees had moved to Portland soon after. He'd never given her another thought. What did Abby remember? What had she heard as a child, whispered behind closed doors after the official story was told? Finding her took less time than he feared. A simple online search. Abigail Shea was now Abigail Vickery, living back in Maine, in a coastal town about 2 hours from Beckett. She was a graphic designer. Married. No listed phone number, but a work email for her freelance business. His email to her was careful, a delicate construction of half-truths. Hi Abby, you probably don't remember me. I'm Cal Maxwell, Danny's old friend from Beckett. I'm working on a sort of personal history project about our childhood there, and I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about Danny. Maybe some of the things he talked about that summer. No pressure at all. Just hoping to reconnect with some good memories. He sent it and felt like a fraud. He wasn't seeking good memories. He was excavating a grave. Her reply came the next morning. It was friendly, brief, but with a curious edge. Gal. Of course I remember you. Danny talked about you all the time. I'd be happy to chat. It's funny you should get in touch now. I've been thinking about Beckett a lot lately. Strange dreams. Can you come up on Saturday? Coffee. Saturday. 2 days. He agreed, his heart a trapped bird in his ribs. The night before the trip, the Echo staged its most aggressive display yet. He was in his kitchen making dinner, when the lights flickered and died. Not a power outage. The digital clock on the stove still glowed. The overhead bulb simply went dark. And in the sudden gloom of the twilight coming through the window, he saw him. Danny. He was standing in the doorway to the living room. Not a glimpse. Not a reflection. He was there. 10 years old, wearing the faded Star Wars t-shirt he'd lived in that final summer. His face was pale, his expression not malevolent, but deeply, unendurably sad. Cal, the figure said, and the voice was not a whisper in Calvin's mind. It was a dry, papery sound that came from the air itself, like the rustle of leaves in a coffin. You have to help me. Calvin dropped the plate he was holding. It shattered on the floor. Danny. I can't get out, the figure said, taking a step forward. Its feet made no sound on the linoleum. He won't let me. You promised we'd go back. You promised we'd finish the game. What game? Calvin breathed, tears springing to his eyes. This was his friend. His lost friend. The grief was a physical pain. What did we promise? The hiding game, Danny said, and now his childish face twisted with a fear that was decades old. He's it. He's always been it. And he's still hiding. In the dark place. We have to find him so I can go. The figure began to fade, dissolving like smoke in the dim light. Find Abby, it whispered, its voice fading back into the psychic static. She knows about the blue rock. And it was gone. The kitchen light buzzed and flickered back on, revealing the broken china on the floor. Calvin slid down the cabinet until he was sitting amidst the shards, his head in his hands, and wept, for Danny, for himself, for the boys they were who had stumbled into a nightmare and called it a game. The game. The hiding game. They'd played it everywhere. The rules came back to him now, sharp and cruel. The person who was it had to hide their eyes and count to 100. The others hid. But there was a special, secret rule they'd made up, just for the spooky places. If you hid in the best, the most secret place, and it couldn't find you before sundown, you won a wish. And you became the new it forever. What had they wished for? Standing at the mouth of that well. What childish, terrible thing had they invoked? He knew then what the well was. It wasn't just a throat. It was the ultimate hiding place. And something had been hiding there for a very, very long time. It had been found by 3 children. And according to the rules of their game, that meant it was no longer it. They were. And it wanted its turn back. Episode 5. The Sister's Secret. The drive to Rockport was a journey through a fading New England postcard, all lobster shacks and rocky coastline. But Calvin saw none of it. The inside of his car was a prison of whispering memories. The smell of the well, cold stone and rotten mushrooms, seemed to have seeped into his clothes. Abigail Vickery met him at a small, wind-blown cafe overlooking the harbor. She was in her late 30s with kind eyes and her brother's quick smile, but it didn't reach the worry in them. After awkward pleasantries, they took their coffees to a table by the window. I have to be honest, Cal, she said, stirring her latte. Your email spooked me a little. I've been having these vivid dreams about Danny, about that summer, for months now. Me too, Calvin said, the truth slipping out. Not dreams exactly. Echoes. She nodded as if she understood. My parents never talked about it. They just closed the door on Beckett. But before my mother passed, she was delirious once with fever. She kept saying, the blue rock. Don't let them play with the blue rock. Calvin's breath caught. The key is under the rock. But the vision had shown a gray stone. What blue rock? I didn't know. Still don't. But I started poking around in the things they'd kept. There's a box in my attic. She took a deep breath. I found Danny's journal. From that summer. The world narrowed to the sound of the waves crashing on the rocks outside. You have it. Not here. At home. He wrote in it that July. It's mostly kid stuff, baseball scores, comic books. But the last few entries. She shivered. They're about you two finding a castle in the ground. About a game. And about the guardian. Guardian? That's what he called it. He wrote that you had to give the guardian a gift to get into the castle. A piece of your world. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. The last entry from the day before the accident says, Cal gave it his soldier. I don't know what to give. It's looking at me. I think it wants my voice. Calvin felt the floor drop away. The toy soldier. The one he'd found under the porch. He'd given it as a gift. To the thing in the well. To buy their passage into its castle. And Danny. It had taken his voice. His laughter, his stories, his future. It had taken his life and let the town call it an accident. It was my fault, Calvin whispered. the words ashes in his mouth. No, Abby said fiercely, reaching across to grip his hand. Her touch was warm, real, an anchor. You were children. You found something old and wrong. My parents knew. I think the whole town knew. Once. They just chose to forget. To pave it over with a lie. Did the journal say anything else? About Maggie Trent? Abby's face went pale. Just one line. Maggie saw its face. Now she's gone quiet. She paused. There's something else, Cal. In the box with the journal was this. She took a small, clear plastic bag from her purse and placed it on the table. Inside was a single, delicate item. A child's red mitten, moth-eaten and faded. Calvin stared. The breath knocked from his lungs. Where did you get this? My dad, Abby said softly. After the search for Maggie was over, the sheriff gave it to him. They found it near where they said Danny had his accident. But it wasn't on the road. Dad said the sheriff told him, keep this. Bury it. And for God's sake, keep your boy away from the Shea Woods. A conspiracy of silence. A town sacrificing its truth to maintain a fragile peace. Calvin told her then. Not everything, but enough. The annual whisper. How it had changed. The key. The well. The figure of Danny in his kitchen. He told her about the silhouette that was following him. Abby listened, not with skepticism, but with a dawning, horrified comprehension. It's not finished, is it? She said when he was done. Whatever you started. The game, Calvin said. We found its hiding place. That means by our rules it's not it anymore. We are. And it wants its turn back. I think it's been trying to tell me how. The echoes are the rules. It's telling me where to hide. Where? The ultimate hiding place, Calvin said, the realization settling on him with the weight of a tombstone. Where it hid. Where we found it. The well. I think it wants me to go back down there. To be the new thing hiding in the dark. So it can be free. Abby was silent for a long time, watching the gulls wheel over the steel-gray water. What are you going to do? What choice do I have? Calvin said. It has Danny. It's using his voice to call me. It's not going to stop. It's either I go to it, or it comes out for the whole town. He met her eyes. I have to finish the game. On October 9th. The day the echo started. The day it can be strongest. He drove back to Beckett as dusk fell. Abby's promise to come if he needed her ringing in his ears. He felt a grim clarity. He had the rules now. He had the next move. His house was dark and colder than the evening warranted. He didn't bother with the lights. He went to his desk, took out the Echo's journal, and flipped to a blank page. He didn't write. He waited. The pressure built in the room. The air grew thick and still. He could feel the silhouette's presence, a stain in the corner of the room where the moonlight didn't reach. It was closer than ever. From the hallway, the patter of small, bare feet. Calvin didn't turn. He stared at the blank page. A small, cold hand slipped into his. In his mind, Danny's voice, clear and close, whispered the final rule. The one that sealed their childhood pact and damned them both. Ready or not, here I come. On the blank page of the journal, letters began to form, not written by any hand, but bleeding up from the paper itself in a rust-brown ink that smelled of damp earth and old blood. It was a map, a diagram of the well, and at the bottom, a single X marked not a spot but a time. 4:23 p.m. October 9th. The final countdown had begun. The Echo Year. Episode 6. The Hiding Place. The week that stretched between him and October 9th was the longest of Calvin's life. Time itself seemed to warp, stretching into agonizing slowness during the day and collapsing into panicked, whispering nights. The town of Beckett, usually a portrait of autumnal tranquility, now felt like a painted backdrop, its colors too bright, its smiles too thin. hiding the rot beneath. He felt the silhouette constantly, a shift in the shadows at the corner of his eye, a cold spot in a sun-warmed room, the faint smell of loam and stone in his car. It was no longer just following. It was presencing itself, growing solid, feeding on his mounting terror. Danny's voice in his head became a near-constant companion, a frantic, trapped radio signal. "It's so dark down here, Cal. He makes me count. I have to count forever. You have to hide better than we did last time." The journal's map seared itself into Calvin's mind. It wasn't a physical map of the well's depths. It was a schematic of intent. The X wasn't at the very bottom. It was in the side of the well, at the end of a narrow, submerged tunnel that branched off from the main shaft about 20 feet down, right where the child's bones lay. The hiding place. He gathered his gear with the solemnity of a man preparing for his own funeral. The strongest flashlight he could buy, batteries, a coil of nylon rope, a hammer and a single cold chisel, the memory of the crack in the stone wall burning in his mind. A pocket knife. Useless tools against what he faced, but they were rituals, anchors to the world of men. He called Abby the night before. Her voice was tight with fear. "Don't ask me to talk you out of it," she said. "I wasn't going to." "Good. Because I think you're right. I've been researching local legends, Algonquin folklore from this region. There are stories of Memagwizi, Little Rock people, tricksters, and older, darker things. Things that lived in the earth before people. Things that hunger for warmth and memory. They're attracted to children's games because the rules are simple and powerful. You gave it a rule, Cal. A contract. How do I break it?" A long pause. "You finish the game. You play by the rules until there are none left to play. Or you change them. But you need a new gift. A powerful one. Not a toy." "What?" "I don't know. Something it wants more than you." The morning of October 9th dawned gray and cold, a blanket of fog smothering Beckett. Calvin taught his classes in a detached, automated haze. His students seemed like lovely, distant ghosts. At 3:15 p.m., the final bell rang, a sound that felt like a death knell. He drove home, changed into old jeans, a heavy sweater, work boots. He packed his bag. He sat in his armchair and waited, as he had every October 9th. The clock ticked. 4:22 p.m. The pressure built, a physical weight on his chest. The air tasted of ozone and grave dirt. 4:23 p.m. The whisper did not come as a voice. It came as a command, a psychic shove that blasted through every cell of his body. Now. It was time. The woods were a cathedral of mist and silence. The usual sounds, birds, squirrels, the wind, were absent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The path to the well seemed clearer, as if something had recently passed through, bending the branches aside. He was expected. The well looked different. The crumbling stones seemed darker, wetter, as if sweating. The air around it was several degrees colder. The black opening no longer seemed like an absence of light, but a source of a different kind of dark, a viscous, tangible darkness that spilled faintly over the lip like inverse smoke. Calvin's hands shook as he tied one end of his nylon rope to the thick base of a pine, threading it through the rusted iron rung for safety. He clipped the flashlight to his belt, put the hammer and chisel in his backpack, and began his descent. The world above vanished with shocking speed. The gray light of the foggy day became a small, coin-sized hole. The cold deepened, a damp, invasive chill that seeped through his sweater. The whispers began in earnest, not just in his head, but echoing off the stone walls. A susurrus of childish voices, some laughing, some crying, all trapped. "You're it. 98, 99, 100. Come out, wherever you are." He reached the spot 8 feet down. The red mitten was gone. Only a faint stain on the rock remained. He kept going, the rope creaking. 15 feet. 20. His flashlight beam danced over the wall, searching for the tunnel from the map. He found the bones. A small, pathetic pile picked clean. Rabbit, he told himself fiercely. Just a rabbit. Then his light found the crack. It was larger than he remembered, a vertical slit in the stone, wide enough to squeeze through. And from within it, a draft flowed, carrying that unmistakable sweet rotten smell, now overpowering. This was it. The tunnel to the castle. To the X. He had to let go of the safety rope. His heart hammered against his ribs. Gripping the iron rungs with numb fingers, he swung his legs into the crack, wedging himself into the opening. The stone scraped against his back. For a terrifying second, he was stuck, panic clawing at his throat. Then he pushed, and he was through, tumbling into a low, narrow passage. He was in the throat. The tunnel sloped sharply downward. He crawled, the ceiling so low he had to press his face to the cold, wet floor. The whispers were deafening here, a physical pressure on his eardrums. He crawled for what felt like miles, the beam of his flashlight revealing only a few feet of rough-hewn stone ahead. And then the tunnel opened. He emerged into a chamber. It was not natural. The walls were too smooth, too angled. It was a small, rough cube, like a forgotten root cellar built by a madman. And in the center of the floor, there was a hole. A smaller, perfect circle of absolute black, about 2 feet across. The source of the draft. The source of the smell. This was the hiding place. The X. But he wasn't alone. Against the far wall, a figure sat hunched. A boy in a Star Wars t-shirt. Danny. Calvin's breath hitched. Danny. The figure lifted its head. It was Danny's face, but waxy pale, like a candle carved to look like a child. Its eyes were deep, dark pools. "You came," it said, its voice the dry rustle from his kitchen. "Now you have to hide." He's almost finished counting. "Who is he?" Calvin whispered, though he knew. "The Guardian," Danny's shade said, pointing a translucent finger at the small, black hole in the floor. "He's down there. In the oldest dark. He gave us his place. Now we have to give him ours. It's the rule." Calvin understood. This chamber, this pathetic cellar, was the prize. It was the castle. The thing from the well, the Guardian, had hidden in that bottomless black hole. They had found its outer chamber, so it had been forced to retreat deeper, to become it. Now to free Danny and himself, Calvin had to take its place in this chamber, to hide here. And the Guardian would be released to where? Into the woods? Into Beckett? Into him? He thought of Abby's words. "You need a new gift. Something it wants more than you." He looked at the pathetic, trapped echo of his friend. He looked at the hungry black hole. He had an idea. A terrible, desperate idea. It wasn't about hiding. It was about changing the game. "We made a mistake, Danny," Calvin said, his voice gaining strength. "We gave it a rule. But we were kids. We didn't know the most important rule." "What rule?" the shade whispered. "The rule about it," Calvin said, stepping toward the black hole. He knelt beside it. The cold radiating from it was intense, a cold that stole thought and memory. When you're it, you have to cover your eyes. You have to count. You can't peek. He reached into his backpack, his fingers closing not around the chisel, but around the small, plastic toy soldier. The gift he'd given as a child. The piece of his world. "It's been peeking, Danny," Calvin said, his voice echoing in the stone box. "It's been watching me for 42 years. That's cheating." He held the soldier over the hole. "A gift for a gift," he said, not to the shade, but to the darkness below. "I took this back. So I owe you something new. A new rule." He dropped the toy soldier into the hole. There was no sound of it hitting bottom. Only a profound, hungry silence. Then from the depths, a voice bubbled up. It was the sound of stones grinding, of roots tearing, of the earth itself shifting. It was the voice from the well, the source of all the whispers. What is your gift? A story, Calvin said, his teeth chattering from the cold and the enormity of what he was doing. A better one. You don't want to be it. It's a boring game. Hiding and seeking in the same old dark. I offer you a new game. A story game. The darkness in the hole seemed to coil, to listen. The guardian was ancient, hungry for experience, for the warmth of life it could never have. It had fed on snippets of Calvin's memory for decades. A whole story. That was a feast. Speak. Calvin began to speak. He didn't tell a fairy tale. He told its story. He gave it a name, a shape, a history it had never had. He wove a narrative from the moss and the stone and the deep time of the earth. He called it the sleeper in the stone, the dreamer of roots, the guardian of forgotten things. He gave it purpose, grandeur, a loneliness that was noble, not monstrous. He painted a picture of it not as a predator of children, but as a forgotten god, slumbering, waiting to be remembered in song, not fear. He poured every ounce of his skill as a storyteller, a skill honed by a lifetime of making the past live for bored teenagers, into the whole. He gave it myths, legends, a whole cosmology centered on it. He lied with the power of absolute conviction. The chamber grew warmer. The oppressive dread lifted, replaced by a strange, attentive stillness. The shade of Danny watched, its form growing fainter. As Calvin spoke, he realized he was not just distracting it. He was binding it. With every word, he was creating a new set of rules, a new narrative prison that was far more gilded and comfortable than a wet hole in the ground. He was offering it the one thing it truly craved, significance. To be a character in a story, not a monster in a well. He finished, his voice raw. And so the guardian, remembered and revered, returned to its deep, sweet dreaming, its hunger sated by the tales told of it, its watchful peace ensuring the quiet of the woods above. For a long moment, there was silence. Then a sound like a deep, seismic sigh of contentment flowed from the hole. A good story, the voice grumbled, now sounding drowsy, almost sated. A better hiding place. In the tale, the blackness in the hole seemed to soften, to lose its terrifying viscosity. It was just a hole again. The dreadful intelligence, the ancient hunger, had withdrawn, pacified by the narrative, retreating into the role Calvin had written for it. The shade of Danny smiled, a real, genuine smile that finally reached his eyes. You changed the rules, Cal, he whispered. You won the wish. What do you wish for? Calvin asked, tears streaming down his face. To forget the dark, Danny said. To just be gone. Calvin nodded. Okay. Danny's shade dissipated, not with a fade, but with a final, soft exhalation, like a child falling asleep. The last of the whispers in the chamber died away. Calvin was alone, exhausted, hollowed out but alive. He crawled back through the tunnel, hauled himself up the rope with the last of his strength, and emerged into the fading afternoon light. The fog had lifted. The woods were just woods again, filled with the ordinary sounds of birds and the wind. He walked back to his car, a different man. The silhouette was gone. The pressure in his head was gone. He felt a quiet he hadn't known since he was 9 years old. Epilogue. 1 year later. October 9th. Calvin sat in his armchair. The house was no longer silent. He could hear the cheerful clatter of dishes from the kitchen, where Abby was visiting, insisting on making dinner. She had become an unexpected, steadfast friend, the only person who knew the truth. He looked at the clock. 4:23 p.m. He waited. He felt nothing. No pressure. No whisper. Just the calm passage of time. On the table beside him lay a new journal. He'd burned the Echoes book. This one was blank. He picked it up and opened it. On the first page, in his own handwriting, he had written a title. The Guardian of the Well, a Becket folk tale. Beneath it, He began to write the story he had told in the dark. Not to bind the thing, but to transform it. To seal it in folklore, where such things belong. As he wrote the final sentence, he felt a faint, distant tremor, not in the earth, but in the air. A contented, sleepy sigh that might have been the wind in the eaves. He closed the journal. The game was over. He was no longer it. He was just a man, sitting in a chair, listening to the sound of life in the next room. And finally, blessedly at peace. The past was just a story now. And he was free to live in the present. The end.